So this video is gonna probably target a couple people in particular who are getting offended at things, and there is a clear reason for this that I don't know how to explain now. Maybe you didn't get enough attention as a child, and therefore the problems that you see with yourself, but you actually pretend you see with other people, or your brain makes you think you see them with other people. Though those usually get amplified pretty extremely when you don't have a proper foundation of emotional support to rest on. Therefore, when you get offended at things, it's much worse because you don't have any sort of backup to rely on. And I'm saying this because I used to get offended easily before. I would argue online. I would make sure that my argument was proven, that I was always the best, that I could win the arguments, and that I was always the one who came out on top. Now, I wouldn't have called myself an easily offended person because I just wasn't really. I could kind of tell the stupid from the smart, but in the same way, I still had some traits of it, and there was traits of it prevalent, more so in possibly the people around me than in myself. But now I'm not dissolving myself completely, but I simply didn't get affected by his extreme causes of getting offended because I saw the mistakes of other people when they got offended, especially at something that I would say. So this video is going to be mainly about whether you get why you shouldn't get offended, basically. So when someone says something, they're saying it from their paradigm, their point of view, and usually they don't say it with too much meaning behind it. But then another person comes along and interprets it, and they might interpret it in a good way. Nice, that's amazing. Now, depending on how emotionally fragile they are, the reaction is going to usually be more extreme on either side. So if someone says something nice about them, they'll probably be super happy about that, and then you can only imagine how bad it goes when something bad is said about them. So that's basically the mark of an emotional person, someone who reacts in some kind of extreme emotional dichotomy compared to what they were, and their mental state and their sense of peace is completely and utterly affected and dependent on the things that people say about them. So basically, the more steady you are and stern, the less offended you are likely to get. But the more emotionally dependent you are on other people, the more likely you're going to get offended, because you're not actually you just don't have like a pole to hang on emotionally or in your brain. You don't really operate that much on logic. And in the last few months, I've completely taken my skin by putting myself through utter boiling agony by making a bunch of cold calls again and again every day. And basically, I got extremely offended at first because people were saying stuff like, no, I'm not interested in your service, what are you on about, hangs up, just other things like that. And those would offend me because I wasn't used to such rejection and such painful defiance of what I believe to be true. So because of that, I wasn't able to really hold on to any kind of pole in my stability emotionally. Now, by the time I started making cold calls this year, I was already completely under control emotionally, so that was okay. So I didn't get too offended, and when I did, I wouldn't take it personally, so I didn't give up or anything. But a lot of people these days get offended very easily if you tap one little thing about their beliefs, and if you show them any kind of truth. And this is plain dangerous, because if you get offended when someone tells you the truth about something and they mean well but it doesn't make you feel good, then that is very, very dangerous, because it means you're going to get stuck in your own way of thinking, and it's a positive feedback loop as well. So the more you immediately defy what other people would say about you, the more pride becomes attached to the actual outcome, and therefore the more likely you are to do it again in the future. So you become more and more set in your own ways, to put it simply. And this is, again, very dangerous, because let's say someone you don't like say something that makes sense. Now, if you're an offended person who is easily emotional, then you're likely going to dismiss what that person says just because you don't believe in that person at all, and you don't like who they are as a human being. Like Donald Trump, for example, you might not like him as a person, but if he said something about, for example, politics, which was completely valid and perfectly sound, you might be like, that's No, no, because he said it. No, like you can see how crazy it is when I'm saying it now. But and you might think this doesn't mean you, but if you're watching a YouTube video and you're a human being who is probably under the age of 40, then it's odds are you are an easily offended person. I'm sorry to say, but the statistics just don't really line up for you. I mean, about 90 to 95% of people these days are, well, I don't know. I could be wrong. Again, I'm just making an assumption uh, based on what I've seen, but the thing is, I've been around a biased demographic, so I can't really say anything. But the thing is, most people who are in college these days, I'd imagine, would be more easily offended than what people were like 20 years ago, because you can't really say anything, for example, on Instagram about anything that might possibly differ with people's opinions, even if your logic is perfectly sensible and what you say makes sense. The person who, in an argument, the person who insults the other party is the one who's lost, in my opinion. And I'm not saying that in a way, in a kind of meaning, like mean way, or again, another word, mean, completely victimized, but in a kind of way that's trying to offend you. And I'm not trying to hurt you or anything, and I'm not trying to disturb your ego either. It's just I'm trying to give you a bit of truth and insight into a way to live a better life, not to be so closed off to opinions that don't perfectly line up with yours. That's all. And I'm not going to bring up any names or games, but there have been instances where I've tried to say something that makes sense, and then I get bombarded by a bunch of people who are saying stuff like, "You are just something phobic," or "You are something hating," and I'm not really hating. It's just I'm, again, this was my own fault because about a year or two ago I decided to express my opinions on something, and the best idea, especially with controversial topics, is just to not express opinions in the first place, because they don't really add anything. Like, I expressed my opinion on this particular video game which came out in 2019 and won Game of the Year, but I didn't really have a reason to, because I hadn't bought the game, but I had played the first game, so then I suppose I thought I was entitled to an opinion, which technically I was, and I was allowed to say anything I wanted, and I don't think I did anything particularly wrong. It was just more of an unwise decision than a bad decision morally. I don't think it was bad morally at all. It was just a bit of a waste of energy and a waste of time discussing it. So, yeah, it was people outside now. I kind of gotta talk over them because I don't want you to hear their voices. So yeah, and recently enough, I've been sort of practicing my ability to not get offended. Because one time when I was at work, the first time I got sort of offended at work was like when some chef, he said, "You've been here long enough. You should be able to hold these plates in the right way." He kind of said it in a brusque way in front of everyone, and now that I think of it, I'm not getting offended at all. At all. But back then, it was like a bloody shotgun was fired straight through my stomach. It was just that awful, and I fired off anyway back into the hall, carrying plates for people, and um I just I was quite offended at that. And a few other times have happened in work where I've just been offended, and little things pile up on top of each other now, though. And I'm not saying I've gotten really anywhere in anything in particular, but I'm less easily offended than I used to be, because I've sort of realized that it's just no use, there's no practical use in um, being offended or hurt by something, because clearly nobody intended to hurt you, but you were hurt anyway. And why were you hurt? It's because your emotional defenses were too low. And if someone says something that contradicts with your worldview, just before you say anything, just open your eyes and think, okay, now why did this person say this? Why? So let's say, why did someone say that? Um, Now, this is a generally offensive topic to most people, but why did someone say that this valid gender role expectation came into place? And then I And I said, why did they say that? They said that because they wanted possibly a utility in something. And why do they want a utility in something? Because they're seeing wastage in the way the world is going now. And why are they seeing wastage in the way the world is going now? And because they intend to optimize the world as good as possible. And why do they want to optimize the world as good as possible? Because they kind of don't look into themselves to see how to improve themselves, and they want to improve the world instead. Just, Socratic reasoning like that, it's better than getting offended. And I know that if you're watching this, there's a very slim chance that you had my situation where your brain just didn't accept any logic whatsoever, and it was purely emotional. I don't think that is the case with you, because it's literally one in a million, one in many millions, I'd imagine, whatever that is. And I'm not saying I'm special or anything. I'm just saying that the cause and effect was so unlikely to happen that the expected value of people in the world who would have this is probably less than 1,000. So, yeah, that's basically how it is. I think that you should kind of just see, well, why does it offend you? Why does something offend you? Why does something about gender roles offend you, for example? Because it's just not right. Why is it just not right? Because it doesn't actually align with what I've been told as I was younger. And why doesn't it align with what you were told as you were younger? Because it was X, and the thing I was told when I was younger was Y. And why were you told Y? Because um, because of the societal oppression at the time or something like that. I don't know. But again, it's just more reasoning, like what is the cause of these things. And that's how you figure out basically every problem ever. You look into the cause of it, because causality is the supreme law of the universe, and every other law of the universe is a subset of that law. And when you can apply that to pretty much any situation, you're going to figure stuff out, whether you like it or not.